So today I'm going to be working on my 2002 Ford Focus. I've had this car since high school. I'm definitely just replacing parts as they break. This thing is, I'm on borrowed time with this thing. I probably have more new parts on this than most new cars. So in particular, today we're going to be working on the back wheel bearing. It's been making a really loud hollowing noise when I'm driving to and from work. So I'm going to diagnose it today. One of the things that I was reading online too is that you can tell if it's a bad wheel bearing if it shakes a lot. As you can see, there's a lot of play in that. It wasn't quite as bad. I already kind of took it apart a little bit, but I just wanted to show everybody how to get this done. And the way that I learned how to do all this stuff is by watching YouTube videos. So I figured I would just make another one here and just add into the information, and hopefully somebody else can learn something by this. So first thing you need to do is take off these 4 bolts here. It's kind of a pain in the ass to get the wheel off. It's like all rusted on there. So I usually put a piece of wood on here so I don't actually hurt my nice expensive rims that definitely did not spray paint. And so I'm using this like fence driver thing to just like knock it off of the hub itself. So hopefully this works here. And it works like a charm every time. So I always just take the wheel and I always put it underneath the car. It's just a good rule of thumb to have in case your jack ever breaks or if it collapses, it's not going to fall on anything. At least hit the wheel first before it crushes your head or arm or whatever. So anyway, the next thing you need to do is take off this dust cap. That's going to reveal the nut that holds on your hub onto the spindle. So you just usually take a screwdriver and pop it off. Like I said, I already took this off earlier, so that's why it's just super easy to come off. So this is a 29mm nut. I had to look online at a few places to make sure that it was a 29mm. It's very, very random. It's a very weird size, so I had to go to O'Reilly's Auto Parts to actually find like this huge impact socket. So it should, they said it's up to 175 pounds of foot-pounds for the torque on here, but I mean, it wasn't really even that hard to get off. Like it was probably about that tight, which isn't that tight at all, which might even mean that maybe that's why my wheel bearing went bad in the first place, which is possible. And I checked the other side already. There's no play in it at all, so I'm assuming that wheel bearing's fine, and hopefully this will diagnose the humming problem I hear when I'm driving to and from work. So we're going to take this whole thing off. Like I said, this is a 29mm nut that goes onto your spindle. So just set it off to the side, don't get it dirty. Now, as you can see, this thing is super rusty, so hopefully the whole thing comes off easily. But if you can hear the crunchy noise in here, that's another telltale sign that your wheel bearing's bad. It should flow pretty consistently, but if you'll hear it, you know something's wrong. It stops and starts in certain places. There's probably a lot of rust in there too. So we're just gonna take a little crowbar here and just try to scoot it off a little bit at a time. It was getting kind of stuck in my brake pad, so it's been kind of a trouble to get off, but if you just do the top and the bottom, there's not the brake pads in the way, and so you won't feel like you're pulling these off. I feel like these were coming out with it, but look pretty good. And while you're in here too, you want to make sure that your brake pads are okay. So if you guys haven't worked on brakes before, these are drum brakes. Basically what they do is when this pulley gets pulled, you can see the lever moves and these brake pads actually push outward onto the inside of this, which slows your car down. And these are a cheap set of brakes. I mean, this is a very cheap car, so they definitely skimp on a lot of these, but if you look at it like a lot of nicer cars, like some import cars, they have disc brakes on all 4, but these are just like a cheap version. You'll see these with a lot of cheap cars, but it's good to know how to work on them at least. But basically, this is the whole thing that I'm replacing. I figured since it's so rusty, this isn't worth keeping. It's not worth pushing out this bearing and pushing in a new one. I don't have a bearing press at all. So I actually just went out and bought a whole new one, which I'll show you here in a second. But if you can hear this, they kind of shake a little bit too. That's your bearing that's going bad. If you catch it in time, it's not going to be in shreds, and it's not going to be a way harder issue in the future. So if you start hearing it, I would just start replacing it now. I'll show you what this other one looks like, but it's good to catch it ahead of time. Alrighty, so I just got this at O'Reilly Auto Parts too. This is the brand new one. As you can tell, it's in a lot better shape than this one here. Quite a bit better shape. And the first thing to do is to look at and make sure that that no parts are stuck on the spindle. That's going to create way more of a headache. And I'm actually really thankful that these bearings were intact. I was watching a couple of videos online, and the issue that they had was that their inside of their bearing here was stuck on the spindle, in which they had to go get a grinder, level it off, and pull off the inside of the bearing. But luckily it all came off with everything. So like I said, that's better to catch ahead of time, just get it done. This was $75 at O'Reilly's. Advanced Auto said it was only $65, but you're not gonna be spending anything more than that, I don't think. So what you wanna do is just make sure this is all cleaned out inside here, because this is where your brakes are. You don't want to have any corrosion on there at all. So we're gonna clean this off real quick, and then we're gonna start installing the new piece. Make sure you inhale as much of this as possible. It just makes you a better mechanic. Definitely not bad for you at all. Alright, that looks about clean enough. I'm gonna just wipe off the spindle here just to make sure it's a good solid thread to it. And that way there's no crust on it to make that hub slide on a lot easier. So I got most of the crust off, so I'm going to put this on. Hopefully it just slides right on. It should. Perfect. So you just want to get a little bit on with your hands. The bolt will do the rest of that for you, which is this bolt. Like I was saying earlier, it's the 29mm. Make sure there's no gunk in there either. Like I said, make sure you keep the threads clean in there. Looks fine. And they recommended to have 175 foot-pounds of torque on here. I don't have a torque wrench at all, so I'm just gonna do it by feel, I guess. As you can see, it's getting in closer and closer until it's nice and tight. Once I get it nice and tight, just want to get it nice and snug without over tightening it as well. You don't want to ruin any of those pads. It definitely feels like a lot smoother of a bearing. So that should solve my humming issue. That sounds pretty. Alright, so I'm going to dispose of this. Alright, once I got this bolt screwed on nice and tight, put the dust cap back on. I had to bend this part back on the edge here, just since I was using a screwdriver to kind of pop it off. I bent it in a little bit, so I just took a needle nose pliers and just bent it out again. So it should just fit right on the outside of this new cap. Get it in nice and even. Where's the hammer? actually a very important piece, even though it feels cheap, to your whole care of your vehicle, because if this lets any air or whatever in it, it's going to rust that bolt, and it's going to make that bolt 10 times harder to get out. So that's why I bent it out and make sure it's a little bit less breathable, I guess. But seems like it's in there pretty good. And now we're going to put the wheel back on. And Quinn was nice enough to put some navel jelly on this, so these bolts are looking nice and crisp. These were completely brown with rust before, so they actually look like halfway decent bolts again, even though they're almost 20 years old. All right, so I got the wheel on here, and so what I'm putting on here, just to make life a little bit easier, I mean, you saw how hard it was to get the wheel off, so I'm just gonna put this little, it's called anti-seize lubricant on the bolts, and this will help the bolts not rust onto these wheels anymore. We went to replace, Quinn got a flat tire on her front wheel, and we went to go take off her bolts to put on her spare, and it actually twisted off the bolts themselves. So then we had to get a tow because we couldn't fix the bolts, you know, on site. So it's really important to make sure that these things don't rust on. So I'm just gonna put a little bit in here on each one of them. I mean, I don't think you need a whole lot. So I'm just gonna do a nice liberal amount there. I'm assuming if you're trying to do this task on your own, you probably already know a decent amount about fixing your car. But one thing that I've learned from my dad and just everybody else who taught me how to fix a car, especially when taking off wheels, you want to tighten the screws, and you don't want to tighten one at a time so tightly that the other ones are at an angle. You want to tighten each one a little bit at a time until you get a nice snug fit, and then crank them tight one at a time. You don't want to just overly tighten one of them, because it's going to make your wheel off center, and it's going to cause more problems over time. So as you can see, I got them all just kind of finger tightened, all relatively about the same. And then we're going to take the crossbar, we're going to tighten it up. And this is definitely a backyard project. As you can tell, I don't have any torque wrenches or anything. This is how you learn how to fix cars, is from YouTube videos and a little bit of elbow grease. But that just means when I do have a torque wrench, it'll make the job 10 times easier. It's good to know how to do both ways. All right, that's probably good. So as you can tell, when I'm trying to tighten these lug nuts, the wheel's moving, so I'm not going to be able to get it as tight as I want to. So if you have a nice, beautiful girlfriend like I have, that can push down the brake pedal, it really makes everything easier. So if you could do that for me, baby. Alrighty, so hopefully somebody learned something from this. I know I'm not a mechanic at all, but I know enough to at least get my car rolling. I'm almost to 200,000 miles finally. Like I said, I'm back to my cars that I've had since high school after going through a few cars. Just need a car to get me through the next few months. So just been kind of fixing this one up, and I've been learning a lot in the process too. So hopefully somebody learned something from this. Just make sure your lug nuts are tight. You can do it in your backyard as long as you have the right tools. The most essential ones were the crossbar to take off the wheel, the 29mm to take off the spindle bolt, and just a crowbar to peel off the hub itself, and then some money to buy yourself a new one. But I think that's all, and we'll see you guys next time. Well, it seems to be working just fine. Seems to stop all right. So I'm gonna take it for a spin.